Welcome back, dear viewer, to Mostly Racing, and this time we're looking at F1's biggest poles. Generally speaking, qualifying is the only opportunity that a driver and car show their maximum pace. Race pace includes car management, and fastest lap would historically be set on worn tyres and ageing engines. Not so much anymore. Now, when I say biggest poles, I mean pole margins, and instead of looking at just pure time in seconds, I'm looking at percentages. Why, I hear you type. This is because a percentage takes into account lap length. A 1 second gap at Monaco is a much stronger performance than a 1 second gap at the colossal Nordschleife, for example. Otherwise the whole video would be full of Nordschleife and old Spa, and you don't want that. Easiest way to think about it is, if a pole lap is 1 minute and 40 seconds, so 100 seconds, a driver who sets a time 1 second slower will be 1% slower. If a pole is less than 1 minute and 40 seconds, then a 1 second gap is greater than 1%, and vice versa. Anyway, that's enough intro guff. I'm curious to know if people have any guesses as to which races may feature. Like and subscribe if you're feeling generous, and let's go! Number 10, Germany, 1967. Remember what I said? I used percentages, so this race wouldn't be full of old Spa and Nordschleife, so our first entry is from the Nordschleife. Hooray! Jim Clark is one of the fastest drivers the world has ever seen, and held the F1 all-time record for pole positions up until 1989. 1967 wasn't the best season for the Scot by his very high standards, and by round 7 of the German Grand Prix, he had 2 wins and sat second in the championship. But he'd only managed 1 pole so far, at Old Spa, which we won't talk about. I suppose in this relatively dry spell, it's only right that he would blitz the field. Around the absurd 22.835km circuit, he set a time of 8 minutes, yes, 4.1 seconds, in his Lotus Ford. The second fastest was New Zealander and eventual season champion Denny Hulme, in a Brabham who lapped in 8 minutes, 13.5 seconds, giving us a gap of 9.4 seconds. Meaning Clark's lap was 1.942% faster than Hulme's. For some context of what that number means, the average pole margin in 2021 was just 0.23%, and in the most recent races I speak to you, the 2022 Monaco Grand Prix, Vettel in 9th was relatively closer to pole than Hulme was in Germany in 1967. Unfortunately, points aren't awarded on a Saturday, and Clark retired on lap 4 out of 15 with a puncture. Number 9, Belgium, 1956, at the Old Spa. Oh god damn it. Okay, this is the only time that Old Spa shows up in this top 10, I promise. Juan Manuel Fangio has the highest pole position strike rate in F1 history, at 56.86%. To put that in context, Lewis Hamilton has a pole strike rate of 35.66% as of the 2022 Prix season. Another record held by Fangio is the most titles in different teams, but more on that later. For his 1956 winning season, he was driving the best looking Grand Prix car of the 1950s, in my opinion, the Lancia Ferrari D50. If you disagree, then you can fight me in the field. This of course was the season where the Argentine won the World Championship after teammate Peter Collins gave up his car and his own championship for the team leader at the finale at Monza. By round 4 at Belgium, Jean Behra was leading the World Championship, believe it or not. A big result for Fangio was desperately needed, and he kicked off his weekend in the best way by out-qualifying his biggest rival Stirling Moss by 4.9 seconds. At a pole time of 4 minutes and 9.8 seconds, this made him the only driver to average over 200 km per hour, which was 1.962% faster than Moss. Like Clark, however, the qualifying dominance didn't translate into a good result, as he also retired from the race while leading. Number 8, Australia, 1997. Now that's more like it. You would expect the reigning IndyCar and Indy 500 champion to be a high quality driver, but even still, Jacques Villeneuve caused something of an upset on his F1 debut at the Australian Grand Prix in 1996 with his immediate speed. He took pole ahead of teammate Damon Hill and narrowly missed out on victory due to an oil leak. 1 year on and he wanted revenge. Maybe. Actually no, he was very pragmatic and upbeat about the whole thing, but anyway, 1 year on and with a new inferior teammate, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Villeneuve recorded a fastest time of 1 minute 29.369 seconds, which sounds so slow for Albert Park compared to today, while Frentzen did a 1 minute 31.123. 1.754 seconds faster around a 90-second circuit, meaning Villeneuve was 1.963% faster. That's quite the gap. But what about the whole field? Allow me to introduce to you the 107% rule. This is a rule used on and off from 1996 to present, where if you are 7 seconds slower than pole, or the fastest time in Q1 as it is today, you cannot race without permission from the stewards. The last time this rule was enforced was way back in 2012, so you really need to be slow for this to come into effect. Well, there were 3 drivers outside for Australia 97. Diniz, who was 6.603 seconds slower, 7.338% off, but was given permission to start. The other 2 were not. Vincenzo Sospiri and Riccardo Rosset were debuting and also retiring the MasterCard Lola Ford in its sole attempt to qualify. They were 11.603 and 12.71 seconds off respectively, or 12.983% and 14.23% slower, which is a greater gap than modern F1 and F2. Terrible. Continuing a trend which I didn't expect, Villeneuve also failed to convert his pole into a result, as he was out of the race at the very first corner after contact with Johnny Herbert.
It must have been Johnny Herbert. There was a coming together, but it is Johnny Herbert and Villeneuve.
Number 7. Netherlands, 1952. The 1952 season holds a distinction along with the 1963 and 65 seasons, where the world champions scored 100% of the points available to them because of dropped scores. In 1963 and 65, it was our friend from earlier, Farmer Jim Clark, but in 1952 it was Alberto Ascari, a World Championship season which was confusingly run to F2 regulations rather than F1. It was a one-horse race for the championship, a one prancing horse race that is, as Ferrari were the only team you'd reasonably expect to see at the front. During those days, a team could run up to 4 cars, and in every race, except the Indy 500, there were at least 2 Ferraris on the podium. They and Ascari were at the height of their powers at Zandvoort, where he qualified on pole position with a time of 1 minute 46.5, because who needs more than 1 decimal place? I don't care if it was done manually with stopwatches, just make up the other decimals. Second was the inaugural world champion and teammate Giuseppe Farina, 2.1 seconds slower, or 1.972% slower. Incredibly, the highest non-Ferrari was Mike Hawthorn in the Cooper Bristol, who was 5.1 seconds, or 4.789% slower, and only the top 5 were within 107% of pole. Needless to say, that rule was not in place in 1952. There was no stopping Ascari in the race, beating Farina by 40 seconds, and Villoresi made it an all-Ferrari podium, a minute and 30 behind the eventual double world champion. Hawthorn, again top non-Ferrari, was 4th and 2 laps down. Number 6. Belgium, 1992. FW14B is the best collection of characters since whatever that popular current TV show is called. Wow, can you believe what happened in the latest episode? Crazy. In this Williams, Nigel Mansell managed to set several records, such as most wins and points in a single season, which have both since been surpassed. Another record which he set, which was also later beaten, was the most poles in a season, 14 out of 16 races, but that remains the highest percentage of poles in a single season. By the time of the Belgian Grand Prix, the shorter version of Spa, the championship was already sewn up, so Mansell could have taken things easy, which he bloomin' well didn't. The top 4 were Riccardo Patrese and Sister Williams, 1 minute 53.557. Third, Michael Schumacher in the Benetton, 1 minute 53.221. Second, Senna, 1 minute 52.743. And Mansell, 1 minute 50.545. 2.198 seconds faster, a 1.988% advantage over the Brazilian. The racing historians amongst you should automatically know the winner of the 1992 Belgian Grand Prix and know that it was not Mansell, but the young Michael Schumacher, the first of his 91 race victories for the German. Ascari aside, massive pole seems like a real poison chalice, don't they? Out of all the races in this list, the 1992 Belgian Grand Prix is definitely the best, so you must check it out if you've never seen it. Legitimately if you can, but if that option is not available to you like us in the UK, there's a link in the description. Number 5. Germany 1968. We had Germany 67, so now it's time for the sequel, bigger and better. The weather all weekend was appalling, conditions which modern F1 would never consider running in, and with very good reason. Supposedly, on Saturday visibility was down to just a few metres, so the organisers put on an additional session on Sunday morning, as no one was mad enough to fly through the green hell at speed. By this time, of course, F1 was becoming increasingly aware of its own lethality, especially so following the death of Jim Clark earlier in the year. As a result, it appears the drivers at the Nordschleife were content to amble around and just get back in one piece, so most of the times aren't particularly stellar, all except for the Ferrari drivers, Chris Amon and poleman Jackie Ickx, who presumably would have been shot by Il Commentatore himself if they weren't going flat out in his cars. Ickx set a time of 9 minutes and 4 seconds, while Amon was 10.9 seconds slower, giving us our first 2% plus gap. 2.004% to be exact. Jochen Rindt qualified third, and was the only other driver to be within 107% of pole, the best part of half a minute off. True to form, Ickx did not claim victory, and truth be told, I won't say anything else about this race, as a sister video to this, looking at biggest winning margins, may already be in the making, and yeah, Germany 68 will be revisited. Number 4. Argentina 1956. It's Fangio again. Making your Ferrari debut must be a very special occasion for any driver, especially so if it's in front of your home fans. This was the exact situation the legendary Argentine found himself. Jack Brabham, Graham Hill, Jackie Stewart, Emerson Fittipaldi, Niki Lauda, Alain Prost, Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton are the drivers who've won the World Championship for 2 different teams at time of recording. Clearly quite the feat, but Fangio laughs at such things. While there are 9 drivers who have won with 2 different teams, El Maestro won with 4 different teams, Alfa Romeo in 1951, Maserati and Mercedes in 1954, and Ferrari in 1956 in the previously mentioned Lancia D50. Changing cars is clearly no issue for the guy, and first time out for the Scuderia he did not disappoint. In a bulging field of 13 cars, only Maseratis and Ferraris, Fangio beat out teammates Eugenio Castellotti and Luigi Musso, who set identical times, by 2.2 seconds, 1 minute 42.5 versus 1 minute 44.7, an advantage of 2.146%. In the race, he had a bit of a mare due to a faulty fuel pump, but after swapping cars with Musso and all the issues in the world with the Maseratis, Fangio converted pole to victory. The big pole curse is barely hanging by a thread at this point, but because Musso and Fangio shared the win, they only scored half points. So Jean Bera, who finished second, actually scored the most points of any driver that day. Number 3, Monaco, 1950. Fangio for the 3rd time. I'm really excited to tell you about what happened in the race, but first we must talk about the setting of the grid, and in this, the 2nd ever World Championship race. They used a system which was thankfully only ever used once. So, as you may know, the Monaco weekend was a touch unusual in that, instead of practicing on Friday, they did so on a Thursday, something which has only recently been updated. The current knockout system of qualifying works quite well, doesn't it? Lose the slowest cars on the day and be left with the fastest as they battle it out for pole position. Now take that and put it in reverse, Terry, because in the Principality in 1950, the fastest 5 was set on Thursday practice, and running on Saturday would determine positions 6th and lower. Imagine you get to the race weekend proper and pole has already been decided, while you're stuck with a shootout for 6th. Rubbish. It was this qualifying system that aided Fangio to claim such a massive pole, as Luigi Villoresi, the fastest man on Saturday, set a time that would have been good enough for second on the grid, a 1 minute 52.3, half a second than Giuseppe Farina, who actually started second. Fangio, however, lapped the Monaco streets at a stomach-churning 103.884 km/h average speed, the slowest average pole speed in World Championship history. Lap length was 3.18 km, so if you want to work out his time for yourself, then go nuts. Worked it out yet? Well, tough. 1 minute 50.2, 2.6 seconds, 2.359% faster. Big pole curse? What curse? Fangio won the race by an entire lap, which was undoubtedly aided by what happened on the first tour. Half of the field was eliminated in a pile-up at back corner after a wave hit the track.
Is that unusual? Oh yeah. At sea, chance in a million.
This 2.359% advantage was the record pole for 33 years until... Number 2, France, 1983. I was staggered to learn that in this video of biggest poles, legendary Speed King Ayrton Senna does not feature. His biggest pole margin came in at number 13 at the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix when he was 1.765% faster than Prost. I was honestly expecting Monaco 88 to be here, but that's even further down. 17th on the list, 1.699% faster than Prost again. Speaking of which, said Frenchman is on this list, and at number 2 no less. Before he was winning titles with McLaren and Williams, he drove unbelievably quickly in unbelievably unreliable Renaults. Back in 1983, the French Grand Prix was held at the same venue that it is today, Circuit Paul Ricard, near Le Castellet. There was a significant difference between how the circuit was back then and how it is now. You know how every year there is a discussion whether or not there should be that chicane on the Mistral Straight? Well, ask someone from the early 80s and their response would have been, quelle chicane? Yes, 1.8 kilometers between Le Col and Seine Corner, so 1.8 kilometers full throttle blast. Renault, of course, had a considerable advantage thanks to their secret weapon and lined up first and second on the grid. Eddie Cheever, 1 minute 38.98, Prost, 1 minute 36.672, 2.308 seconds faster, giving the Frenchman an advantage of 2.38%, and this is a guy known for his racecraft rather than his one-lap qualifying pace. In the race, he set fastest lap on the way to victory. He led all but 3 laps, so he narrowly missed out on the Grand Slam, or Grand Chelem if you want to be fancy. And now, we reach number 1, the biggest pole in F1 World Championship history. I wonder if you've guessed this at home. Well, if you watch Autosport videos, you'll know exactly what number 1 is, as I put out a video today as I do this recording talking about it. Number 1, Britain, 1992. It's the FW14B again, the same car in the top 10 twice, like Fangio's Lancia Ferrari. What amazing machines they are. You may have felt entry number 6 was a touch light, and that's because I'll expand on what is so special about the car now. All the bells and whistles on this one. Semi-automatic transmission, active suspension, traction control, and even anti-lock brakes. I'm sure Williams would have given Mansell and Prix the racing line snake if they could. To this day, it remains possibly the most sophisticated and technologically advanced F1 car of all time, thanks to these electronic gubbins. I mean, just look at some of these pole margins throughout the season. South Africa, pole by 3/4 of a second from Senna, 1.2 seconds ahead of teammate Prix in Brazil, a second from Schumacher in Spain, second from Prix in San Marino, 9/10 from Prix in Monaco, the 2 seconds from Senna at Spa that we've already touched on, 8/10 from Prix in Japan, and finally, at Silverstone.
Across the start-finish line at 170 miles an hour and into 6th to 185 before dabbing the brakes down to 5th, sweeping through tops at 150 miles an hour, right out to the edge of the circuit, up to 6th, down towards Beckett's complex, dab on the brakes, down to 5th, 170 there, down to 4th, 150, and once again 130 through the last right-hander of Beckett, hard on the power, accelerating, sweeping to the outside of the circuit, taking the racing line, moving across now up to the left-hand side towards Stowe Corner, 185 miles an hour, dab the brakes, down to 4th, 120, sweeping round, keeping tight, hard on the power now, down through the Vale, 5th gear, up to 165, hard on the brakes again, down to 2nd, 60 miles an hour, up to 70, into 3rd gear, 4th gear, pulling 4G now, 5th gear, sweeping out, left-hand side of the circuit, into 6th and towards Abbey Corner, absolutely flat out, 175 miles an hour, pulling up to 180 before the daunting Bridge Corner. Sweeping through, absolutely flat out at 185 miles an hour, down to 2nd gear, 70 miles an hour, 80, 90, back down to 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, down on the brakes to 2nd gear again, One more corner to go. Second gear through the last part of Woodcote. Hard on the power. Second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, and across the line in a fantastic 1 minute 18.9, the fastest ever lap.
1.919 seconds ahead of Patrese, 2.43% faster. In 2021, that was the average gap between pole and 15th. Just look at some more numbers. Senna third was 2.7 seconds slower. Schumacher 4th, 3.1 seconds slower, and only the top 10 were within the non-existent 107% rule. What about the big pole curse? No chance. Mansell's fastest lap was 1.805 seconds faster than anyone else's. He led every single lap and won the race. This famously led to the Red 5 fans breaking ranks and swarming and ultimately blocking the track. Quite frankly, he should have been disqualified for the amount of people touching him and the car. But good luck to any officials trying to leave the track if they enforce that rule. Personally, I think these scenes of triumph are a good way to round off this video. So that was the 10 biggest pole margins in F1 history. Are there any surprising names on there, or any surprising names not on there? Let me know in the comments. Also let me know, is this numerical look back on F1 history something you find interesting? Because I quite enjoyed making it. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.